Straight to Parliament this afternoon, where the countdown to President Cyril Ramphosa's economic reconstruction plan continues. Our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, is there tracking the story for us, and he joins us live. A very good afternoon to you, Xolani. Now, the infrastructure-led growth has been touted as a major part of the recovery plan. What can we expect from this afternoon?
Good afternoon, Tammy, and it's quite an important question that you are asking, because it's not the first time that we are talking about infrastructure. We've seen the president holding symposiums where he was calling investors from around the world to actually buy into the infrastructure fund that he has created as the president of the country. And we have heard him and the private sector agreeing that indeed infrastructure-led growth is going to be important. So we can expect him to actually touch on infrastructure. And what kind of infrastructure we're talking about? We're talking about all infrastructure that is going to actually be labor intensive. So it's going to be an important talking point. There was a figure touted of 1 trillion rands as a target, and a number of other projects that were actually announced. So when it comes to infrastructure, the private sector is actually buying into it, and we've seen how that is going to be important in terms of economic growth and jobs. But there are some, concessions that the private sector wants. We saw the Mooikloof development, where it's one of the projects and one of the biggest in the world, 54,000 units in the east of Pretoria. The president was there himself. It is those kind of projects when it comes to infrastructure that we are talking about, and supporting those labor-intensive projects where thousands of jobs can be created, that we can expect to be supported in this economic recovery plan.
Now, we know, Xolani, that unemployment is a big issue, continues to be a big issue, and the president is expected as well to touch on this too. But is unemployment and the easing down of unemployment something that government can actually focus on? Can we actually be looking to government to be a major employer?
That is a question that has been asked, and everybody has been saying that government is tasked with creating an enabling environment for small businesses to the big business, to make sure that it is easy for them to actually hire those who need the jobs. But many have said that it is not government's job to ensure that we hire people. We've seen previous administrations, failing to actually live up to those, promises that they would have made in the past from, President Jacob Zuma's administration. We started, 11 years ago to this particular administration. The jobs promised were not delivered. In fact, we have regressed, and COVID-19 has made things even harder for South Africa, just like many countries in the world. So it's an important question to be asked. But yes, government has a role, Tammy, to actually play when it comes to removing the red tape in creating businesses and making sure that SMMEs, which have been identified as the biggest employer, are actually encouraged to develop so that they can employ more people. As far as government being a huge employer, it is still and it will continue to be the single biggest employer in the country, with almost 1.3 million civil servants. But they have a role to play in creating an enabling environment for everyone in South Africa.
Now, let's touch on corruption for a moment here. We know that it's a big issue in the country. Do you expect it to be one of the highlights of the plan?
Well, if you look at the president's previous speeches, he has touched on, gender-based violence. I think President Cyril Ramphosa has elevated that particular issue. When you look at particularly the recent, undertakings when it comes to making sure that funds are available to deal with gender-based violence, for example. But the recent action that we have seen from the Hawks on corruption-related, arrests is something that has been welcomed quite a lot around the country. And when you look at, when you listen to what really the Moody's latest meeting 2 weeks ago had to say, it did not paint South Africa in a good light when it comes to where South Africa is in the corruption stakes. Even last week, the World Bank mentioned South Africa and Kenya as having been the two countries where corruption reared its ugly head, even on issues such as PPE corruption. So when it comes to the private sector and the investors, they definitely want an undertaking. They've actually said, as business, they want to see people, the corrupt, in orange suits. And that is a clear message to government that corruption should not be tolerated. I would find it very difficult if the president did not mention corruption and what government intends to do to stem the tide of corruption and actually even change perceptions into what government has undertaken in the past. It's an important one to instill confidence not only among South African but in the private sector as well. So it would be quite a surprise not to find mention of it in there.
Well, I hear, Xolani, that you also have your own expectations of what you hear or what you expect to hear from the president this afternoon, very much like every single South African. That's our business editor there, Xolani Mbanjwa, touching on some of the expectations for today.